Welcome to Color Me Green, a podcast focused on making the world a greener place. We've discussed a ton of topics on the show, and you know, if you're an avid listener, that I love discussing the pros and cons of those topics because I'm human. I'm not blind to the fact that all practices and products that are labeled as green or sustainable are just that. But the one thing I really can't stand is when people refuse to take up a more sustainable way of living because they think a certain way about it. So for today's episode, I looked up a few myths that surround sustainability and the living green lifestyle that might be a few reasons that people haven't started caring more about the environment and their actions that affect it. The first myth being that small changes don't matter. All I have to say is that small change is better than no change at all. Think of it as baby steps. No one, in most situations, just jump all in right off the bat. Most things are done with baby steps. You start a little at a time, see what you like to do, what you don't, and adjust accordingly, adding more and more the more you get comfortable with the situation. If we waited for everyone to live more eco-friendly, we'd never get anywhere. Having a lot of people doing an imperfect job at eco-friendly living does way more for the planet than just a few people doing it perfectly. It's so much better for yourself and the planet to focus on what you can do instead of what you can't do. If you want to listen back to the last episode, I give some tips on living plastic-free, and that may just help give you a head start in the right direction. I think this next myth is one that, if you know me and are a frequent listener of the show, you'll know I totally disagree with. That sustainable products are expensive and hard to find. Now, first, I have to say that yes, I agree they can be expensive, but that's because the resources we use to make non-sustainable products are easier to come by and therefore less expensive. But in no way do I think they're hard to find. In the next myth, I'll go over more on how some things just can't be replaced with eco-friendly versions, and that's totally fine. But replacing what we can is what we should focus on. Now, something to keep in mind is that getting rid of what you already own to buy something new and more eco-friendly is not what we're going for. It's best to use what you already have and then be more mindful about future purchases. I have a few episodes that list a ton of sustainable product swaps that I absolutely love and adore that you could take into consideration. They're easy to transition to and easy to find. I do understand that money is often the biggest issue, so maybe try a product or two at a time and see what you like. I've definitely bought products that I didn't like, finished them, but I definitely didn't repurchase them. Instead, I find a different version of that product, so I'm still trying to be eco-friendly, purchasing an eco-friendly version, but finding the version that I'm comfortable with. I can say that as someone who has made swaps, I've noticed that especially like with my bars of shampoo and conditioner, that they last a lot longer than any bottled version I have ever had. Ever. So try out a swap or two, and if that's not in your budget right now, or you can't find a product in a sustainable version, try buying secondhand. Overall, buying secondhand is the most sustainable thing we can do. We aren't adding to the demand for new unsustainable products and instead repurposing or reusing products that resources were already used to make. So back to how sometimes you can't find products you want in sustainable options. So this next myth is that you can't use any plastic at all. Obviously, when we think about sustainability, our minds go straight to plastic. It would honestly be the biggest goal of goals to eliminate the use of all plastic from our lives. The majority of stuff contains some sort of plastic, so it's not entirely realistic to get rid of it entirely. But that doesn't mean that we can't cut down on our plastic consumption in ways that make sense and fit our lifestyle. I know I sound like a broken record, but a lot of the products I've personally swapped to that are plastic-free swaps have saved me from contributing to so much plastic waste in a way that to some may not even seem like a big deal. While there's only so much we can personally do, it's important to note that companies are the most responsible for the majority of the plastic waste. So when they decide to change their packaging and production to focus on more sustainable practices, that is when we'll see the biggest changes. One way we can help this is to buy more sustainable products when and where you can. I've said this before, but when companies see us buying sustainable products, we are creating a demand for those products, which should hopefully make larger companies want to keep up with that demand and hopefully make positive changes themselves. Now, I want to take a second to discuss a few myths that are a bit more serious. The first being that climate change and other environmental challenges are not affecting us personally. Now, I can only speak as someone living in America and what I see and notice, but climate change and environmental challenges are affecting all of us personally, whether you notice it or not. For example, increasing numbers of droughts may cause increasing crop failure, food shortages, and increased costs. Countries like India, Australia, Africa, the Middle East, and Asia are at an increased risk for heat-related issues like heat stroke, which can be deadly at its worst. In other countries, increased rain with torrential downpours followed by dry periods also affect crops and certain habitats. Even if you aren't personally experiencing a change, or what you consider a change, doesn't mean it isn't happening. The last myth is, in my opinion, the most important one. That just one person can't make a difference. Any change that has ever happened has started from just one person, whether through an idea or an action. And imagine if everyone thought this way, that no one can make a change. If everyone thought that way, we'd for sure be doomed. We are all a factor in the push towards sustainability and protecting our environment as well as our planet. The planet that we live on and that we all so selfishly rely on for the air we need to breathe, the water and food that gives us the energy and nutrients to survive. The one and only planet we have to survive on in our entire universe, because we can't go anywhere else. Don't you think it may be beneficial to do what you can to protect the only true home we are ever going to have? Sure, you may not think that you'll see any real effect of climate change in your lifetime, but what about your children and your grandchildren and all those that come after you? Don't you think it's selfish to not do something now, even if you won't be here? Don't you want to do what you can to make sure our beautiful planet can continue to be the wonder that it is for everyone who comes after us? Even if just one person listening to this podcast takes even a slight interest in changing their lifestyle to make our home a little greener, that's good enough for me. Because change is a chain reaction. It takes one person to spark a change in someone else. And it takes one person to change the world. I want to thank you for listening to today's episode of Color Me Green. New episodes are coming out weekly, and hopefully each one has something you can take away and learn from. If you want to request a certain topic to discuss, please feel free to message me on the show's Instagram at Color Me Green Podcast, linked in the show notes. If you loved today's episode, please make sure to leave a review, as I will be randomly picking reviews every week as they roll in to read on the show. One of the best ways to help change the world is to share this episode with a friend and let them also learn what they can do to live more sustainably. And please remember to reduce, reuse, recycle, and live green. See you next week.